I am, I know you're not Scottish, but do you own a set of bagpipes?
No, I do not. But I have to say, here in the UK, we're applauding for the National Health Service at 9 o'clock, but only on Thursdays. And last Thursday, in the area where I live, someone went down to their garden and played a set of bagpipes, which was really lovely. Then everyone came out.
Oh, that is lovely.
That
That's
was
very
really nice.
nice. Here we're
Yeah.
doing it too at 8 p.m. every night.
Every night. They're doing it every night in Cuba as well, but here it's only once a week, which I think is a bit sad.
Yeah, I wonder why they decided on that.
I don't know. Maybe they didn't. Oh, I don't know. Maybe they didn't think they could get people to do it more, but I'm sure people would do it every night.
Yeah.
And you're in Chicago then?
No, I'm in Los Angeles.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're on the East Coast. No, West Coast. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Los Angeles. And what's the situation like there with COVID-19?
Well, just yesterday, the governors of California, Washington, and Oregon made a pact that they were going to together collaboratively plan the return to normalcy. So, not to outbid each other for medical equipment and to plan it together. So I think that's a good step. And that was in the face.
Oh, I thought you meant to get rid of the lockdown or social distancing or something.
Well, eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to plan it rather than just one day saying, okay, it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is in the face of Trump basically saying, no, I say what, well, he said, I call the shots.
Yeah, he did. And he was wrong as well.
Right, right.
Legally, that's what I just saw a report that said another massive, lie or misinterpretation of the law by Trump.
Right, right. Well, listen, it's really great to meet you. I enjoyed your presentation the other day on the call so much, and I'm really thrilled that you're going to be presenting it today and that I can have the opportunity to get it out to more people. Because that's what this new show for me is all about. So I want to go ahead and get to that. Well, first, actually, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about yourself. But I do want to have plenty of time for you for your presentation, which is great. I know the other night you did it like in lightning speed. So, but I know that you once taught at the London School of Economics, and now you're teaching there in Glasgow, among other places. And I just would like to know a little bit more about your journey of how you came to try and do what you can to make the world a brighter place.
Okay, so my parents are left-wing, and when I was little in London, I grew up going on protests against apartheid and for disarmament of nuclear weapons and against deportations and things like that. And when I was 18, so I had just finished what we call here A-levels, is what you need to get into university. My sister, who was slightly over 2 years my senior, said to me, I'm taking a year out of university and I'm going to live in Cuba. Why don't you come with me? And this was in 1995. So if you know a bit about Cuban history in this period, you will know that the Soviet Union disintegrated, although the Berlin Wall came down 2 years earlier, but it was in December 1991. And the disintegration of the Soviet bloc plunged Cuba into a severe economic crisis. they had shifted their trade from being almost entirely with the United States prior to the revolution of 1959 to being almost entirely with the Soviet bloc through Comecon, the Council of Mutual Economic Exchange, but mainly within that with the Soviet Union. So the first signs of the crisis came when the Soviet Union announced actually in 1990 it was going to massively cut the export of oil to Cuba. And, you know, Cuba was massively, almost entirely dependent on Soviet oil at that point. Very little domestic production and so on. So as a consequence of the collapse of the Soviet bloc, Cuba lost 86 to 87% of their investments and trade, and within 2 to 3 years their GDP had plummeted by 34%, which is astronomical. I mean, it's usually associated with a war or famine, that sort of economic collapse. You know, I think we're going to see something along those lines as a result of the pandemic, but, you know, even perhaps not 35%. So it was a really, really difficult period for the Cubans. The worst year was, you know, in terms of the data, was 93. And then the government took a set of measures, set of reforms were introduced, and things started to pick up. 94 was also a very difficult year. And in 1994, my sister went on, she herself was a teenager at that point, went on a solidarity brigade. So international solidarity was really important for Cuba in that period of isolation, because when Cuba lost its trade and political partners, you know, it was the end of the Cold War. But rather than say, okay, well, this is over now, we can, you know, loosen restrictions on Cuba and stop the hostilities between Cuba and the US, the United States government actually tightened the blockade, and they saw Cuba as like the last domino to fall. And they, many experts and commentators thought it was just a matter of time until, you know, it would be the end of Cuban socialism, as had happened in Eastern Europe. And they decided to give the can a kick along the road, which was essentially by means of increasing the restrictions on Cuban trade and relations. And it was in this very terribly difficult context that first my sister visited Cuba on a solidarity brigade for a few weeks and absolutely got captivated by the island, and then said to me, I'm dropping out of uni for a year. I'm going to live in Cuba. Why don't you come with me? I was 18. I didn't speak any Spanish at the time, but we went to live in Cuba, and I was equally captivated. We lived among Cuban people. We hitchhiked around the island. We joined the same queues for food and everything else. We took 2 bicycles out to Cuba. There was, you know, suddenly there was no oil to drive cars. Cars were left to rust in garages, and the whole nation, a Caribbean nation with no precedent of cycling, no experience of cycling, you know, took to bicycles. And it was just an incredible experience. It really changed me. But since then, in addition, I have campaigned against the US blockade, or embargo, as you call it in the United States. And also, I think that there are so many inspiring examples that Cuba provides of how rich human relations can be when you remove the commodification of labor, the commodification of our relationships, when you have a different set of social values, when you remove from people the constant anxiety that they have, even, you know, fairly well-off people in a capitalist country or an imperialist country, developed capitalist country, which we see now, the anxiety about how will I continue to pay my rent or my mortgage? How will I pay for, especially in North America, how will I pay for my medical care? How will I get my children decent education? How will I purchase the latest whatever it is that, you know, everyone's told they need to have, which is all the rage. So if you remove that anxiety from people, which is removed from Cubans, because, as you know, they have free access to healthcare and education, but also highly subsidised or provided free access to culture and sport and transport, and 96% of Cubans own their own home. So if they do pay rent, legally rent cannot amount to more than 5% of their income. So, you know, there's a lot of talk about how poor Cubans are. And in monetary terms, that might be correct. For most Cubans, that is correct. There's also a lot of infrastructural poverty. So hardly anyone has hot running water in their homes, for example. But in terms of the standard of living, what Cubans are able to do with their lives.
I just have to say that now that you said that about the hot water, I myself visited Cuba and I was never so happy to have a cold shower as
There is that, but
really hot when I was there.
But you know, even Fidel Castro did a very famous speech, one of those watershed speeches, which ushered in a new period in the Cuban Revolution, known as the Energy Revolution. And he was talking about, he was saying in front of a televised audience and an audience in the University of Havana, he was saying, no one here knows the cost of energy because we subsidize it so heavily. People leave lights on, people leave gas on the cooker, you know. No one knows because the state is providing it. And he was saying, you know, it's phenomenal how many people have a hot heat water in the summer in Cuba, which we don't understand when we come from much colder climes. We struggle with the heat. We're grateful for a downpour of rain or for a cold shower. So yeah, that was how my journey started.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty powerful. Like you got introduced to a whole different ball game.
Yeah, as I always say, it's like taking everything that I knew as a teenager growing up in the centre of London, you know, one of the wealthiest capitalist countries in the world, taking everything I knew and turning it on its head. And it was a phenomenal experience.
And is that what got you interested in economics?
Well, I'm not so much interested in economics as a subject, which is more about models, abstract models, and theorizing and predicting and so on. I'm interested in economic development, economic history or development. So what actually happened, the story of development, the story of different classes and the way that things are produced, the way that things are distributed, the standard of living of people.
Your experience there contributed to that?
Well, yeah, it must
you were
have.
there pretty young. That was before you actually. Well, no, I know. I went to university in Lancaster as well, so I know how the British system works. So by the time you were taking your A levels, you were probably already geared in that direction.
Well, I took history, economics, and English for A level. So yeah, the history and the economics were there. So yeah, I think. You know, when I did my A-level economics, I walked into my first class and the teacher, who was also the deputy head of the school at that time, told us in our first lesson, the reason that people produce is to make a profit. That's lesson one. Number two, the central problem of economics is there are finite resources. Finite resources and infinite wants. So I'm there, the annoying student, putting up my hand. So if that's true, why do we need advertising? So, you know, I think that being in Cuba, the important lesson that I took from it was that there is a different way to organise society. There is a different way to organise development. And you can focus your development on different things. It can be private profit as your priority, or it can be human well-being, the development and application of science and technology to social development. So
I look like she made me speechless, right? And she's kind of like, oh, you're going to say something, Jennifer? Oh, man. But seriously, did you get that last part? Can you imagine that? The development and application of science and technology for the advancement of human well-being and for the social development rather than for profit? Wow, I don't know about you, but that just, that thrills me and excites me to think about what that would look like for us, especially in a country where we really have so much wealth. Where's it all going though? I think it's all starting to become more apparent. Anyway, something to think about, right? Thanks so much for everyone for joining me on this edition. If you didn't get a chance to see Helen's presentation, please go back and watch it. It's really great. And meanwhile, just keep having a brighter day. I'm going to do the same. And until then, see ya. Bye.